So here's the last page. So it shouldn't be too bad actually to go through the rest of this. For solving, there's 4 different methods that are listed at the top of your page, which is square roots, completing the square, factoring, and the quadratic formula. In every single case, you should know which problem that you want to do based on what they give you. So in this first one, when I look at this is square roots because it is one variable. This shouldn't be hard to solve because you've been solving problems like this since 8th grade. Because whenever you get a variable, you always want to get a variable by itself, and this one is very easy to get by itself because I have that plus 72. So how do I undo that? Oh, I subtract 72. So then I get 9x squared equals negative 72. And then what I do is I go, oh, I got a 9 by the variable. How do I get rid of that? Oh, I divide by 9. I divide by 9. So I get x squared equals negative 8. And then I go, oh, I got a square. How do I get rid of the square? Oh, I square root both sides, which is going to give me x equals plus or minus. Now I don't know what the square root of 8 is, so I'm going to bring that up on my calculator. And that's going to be 2.8. So this would be 2.8i, or plus or minus 2.8i. Do not forget the plus or minus. This is a squared problem. It should have 2 answers. Next one. When I'm looking at my method, again, I look through and I go, oh, look, it only has one variable. I've been doing this since 8th grade. So when I solve this, I'm going to add 27 to both sides. I'm going to get 3x squared equals 27. I'm then going to divide by 3. I'm going to get x squared equals 9. Now at this stage, I'm going to go, oh, how do I get rid of a square? I square root. The square root of 9 is 3. So I'm going to get x equals plus or minus 3. This again, this method is called square roots for both these problems. I'm fine if you call it the Algebra 1 method. Like you've been doing this since the very beginning of Algebra 1. Just solving an equation. There's not 2 variables. There's not anything tricky or difficult that I have to do. If it has one variable only, you just solve it by square roots. Let's look at the next problem. On this one, I can't use solve by square roots like we did on the last problem because it now has 2 variables. Now normally we would go to factoring and then completing the square and the quadratic formula. On this one I'm going to jump straight to the quadratic formula because I have a 5 and it doesn't divide out, which makes this a little bit trickier. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to throw this in the quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So when you plug that in, you're going to get negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 4 times 5 times negative 9 over 2a is going to give me 10. So now this should break up into 2 problems. I'm going to put that whole square root thing in my calculator so I don't have to worry about making a sign mistake or anything else. So 16 minus 4 times 5 times negative 9. And that's 196. Then I'm going to do the square root of 196, and that's going to give me 14. So we're going to have negative 4 plus 14, 10 on the bottom, and then negative 4 minus 14 over 10. Because again, we have that plus or minus. So when you have plus or minus, you can't do plus and minus at the same time. You need to separate it into 2 separate problems. So this is going to equal negative, well, that's going to be negative or positive 10 over 10. So that's going to just be a positive 1. And then this will be negative 18 over 10, which is negative 1.8. And those would be my 2 answers. Let's look at this next one for 14. So for 14, again, we can't solve this by square rooting. This again was quadratic formula. Sorry, I forgot to put that down. So this again, I can't solve this by square rooting because it has two variables. So now I'm going to try to factor it because it doesn't have a number in front. So things that don't have a number in front, it's really easy to check factors. We go, does it multiply? Does it add? And I only know two things that give me 9, which is 9 and 1, 3 and 3, and I can't make that become 4, no matter how hard I try. So I know 9 is a bad number. So once I know 9 is a bad number, I'm going to get rid of the 9. Because it wasn't helpful for me. It just was a bad number. Add it to the other side. I'm going to get x squared plus 4x equals 9. And I'm leaving a blank because we still want to factor if we can. So we're going to pick the number for it to factor. The perfect number every time is you cut this in half and then you square it. So when I do that, now this side I can factor. This will factor into x plus 2 and x plus 2, and this side's going to give me 13. And I know what's faster than writing x plus 2 and x plus 2. That's x plus 2 squared equals 13. Then I'm going to square root both sides. I'm going to get x plus 2 equals, the square root of 13 I think is around 3.6. We're going to double check. And it is. So we're going to get 3.6 and negative 3.6 because we need two answers like always. Subtract 2, subtract 2, subtract 2, subtract 2. X equals 1.6 and negative 5.6. This method we just did was called completing the square. And the reason it's called that is because this number would not factor before, so we had to complete it. We had to fill it in so it will factor. Okay? Let's try the next problem. Okay, so for these problems right here, we need to solve them. And so when I need to solve this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look through my methods. Again, square rooting won't work because it has two variables. We could check if this factors. I'm going to actually look if this one factors. And the reason why is, see how you have that 2 in front? Now before when I said you had a number for your x squared, just instantly go into quadratic formula mode. But this 2 is super nice because it divides everything. So let's just divide everything and see what we get. So we're going to divide everything by 2. And we're going to get x squared plus 3x minus 6 equals 0. And we're a little bit unfortunate because it doesn't factor. So if it doesn't factor, generally you go into completing the square mode. I'm not going to do that though because I know that I'll have to cut that 3 in half and then square it. And half of 3 is 1.5 and 1.5 squared is like 2.25. It's just going to give me a whole bunch of decimals that I don't want to deal with. So let's throw this thing in the quadratic formula. So if you remember again, the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so when I have something like this, we're going to plug in our b term, which is going to be negative 3, plus or minus 3 squared is 9, 9 minus 4 times 1, because a is now 1, and c is negative 6, all over 2a, which is just 2. Well, I'm going to put that whole thing again in my calculator so I don't make a mistake. So 9 times 4 times negative 6. Whoops, I did that wrong. 9 minus 4 times 1 times negative 6. It's 33. Then we'll have to do the square root of 33. It's going to give us 5.7. So we're going to have negative 3 plus 5.7 over 2 and negative 3 minus 5.7 over 2. And when we do that, that's like 2, that's going to be 2.7 divided by 2, so it's going to be a real small number. Yeah, 1.35. And that's negative 8.7 over 2. So again, it's going to be a weird number. 4.35, so negative 4.35. And that will be our two answers. So just make sure, like when you're going through, try to use the correct method. Last one, we haven't used factoring yet, so this one should be easy. It should factor. And it does, because you can make 12 become 4 if you pick 6 and 2, and you make the 2 negative. So this factors like this. Since it's equal to 0, we need to make this equal to 0. Well, that would give us negative 6. That would give us positive 2. And this would be our answer. We use factoring. Okay. So on the back side, when you're looking through everything, just make sure you can do all the different types. Make sure you know how to decide the different types. And it will make it a lot easier. Again, there's no other type of problem that I could put on here or any other type of method, right? Like it's going to fall into the one of the categories. Either it's going to have one variable, you use square roots, or it's going to have two variables, and then you can either factor it, and if you can't factor it, then you complete the square. And if it has a number in front, or it's got this odd b term, it's normally a little bit easier to use the quadratic formula. So if you need any help, just let me know.